DreAllDay.com.
You're now tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unifying philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is trashing hip-hop, quote-unquote, culture. Before we get into this, I'll remind you of two things. First of all, my text message number down below in the description. Once we start sending it out again, I'll be talking about it a lot more. Secondly, Work on Your Game University. You want to have me as your direct coach. You already know this. You need someone who is going to help you and hold you accountable for stepping your game up. You already know that as well. And you just need to find the right person. You know that as well. Well, guess what? All three questions, all three challenges are solved by you going to workonyourgameuniversity.com. You're already listening to my show. You already got a pretty good feel for my personality, my style, and my approach. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com and take the next step to having me as your direct coach. And let's get to work. 2025 is happening already. We ain't got time to waste. That out the way. Get into this topic of trashing hip hop culture. First of all, I'm a fan of hip hop culture. All right, and this is going to be a two-part series, by the way. I'm a fan of hip hop culture. I am a product of, I think it's fair to say, hip hop culture, and I am a hardcore, consistent listener of hip hop music. Now, the reason that I'm putting the word culture in quotation marks is because many of the things that people call hip hop culture I don't believe are hip hop culture, but these are the things that have been widely popularized and lionized and celebrated as part of hip hop culture, even though many people who are defenders of it probably would not say that these are directly the main things. But I'm going to point out some of the things that have been used as part of hip hop culture to help popularize it that I am definitely not a fan of. And these are the main reasons why hip hop culture gets taken to task, because these things are definitely a part of it, even if they are unspoken. I'm going to help point them out. Okay. So all of you have heard of this phrase, hip hop culture. Maybe many of you participate in it. Maybe many of you have watched from afar this concept of what we call, quote unquote, the culture. And when people say the culture, what they're usually referring to is hip hop culture. And this does not necessarily only include Black people. So if you are white or Asian or Latin or Native American listening to this, you may be part of this as well. And anybody who is plugged into and interested in some way participates in hip hop culture. If you pay attention to it, if you stream it on the internet, if you listen to a song, you are participating in hip hop culture. And sometimes people call it urban culture or street culture or Black culture. All right, I'm talking about all the same things here. Okay. Now I got to give a hat tip to a guy by the name of Dr. Boyce Watkins. He's the first person I heard mention these things in the way that he did. And when I heard him saying it, I said, you know what, I'm going to hijack this and I'm going to make my own content talking about these exact points. So they are very accurate and they're very true. And again, people who are defenders of the culture probably will say, well, Dre, that's not all of what the culture is about. And I agree. So let me say that up front. Things that I'm about to share here are not all of what the culture is about, but they are definitely part of it. And there are no other cultures in the United States that I know of that celebrate any of these points as part of their culture. Our culture celebrates it. That's the part that I'm taking it to task for. Now I'm going to point these out. Let's get it. And again, it's going to be a two-part series. So today and tomorrow. Point number one. Today's topic, once again, is trashing hip-hop, quote-unquote, culture. Point number one is Black death. And I mean this one literally. Black death, meaning Black people dying. This is part of the hip-hop culture. Our culture has been obsessed with dead people for a long time. And not just necessarily dead people like looking up to somebody because they died. Like Martin Luther King died, George Washington died, Malcolm X died. We can look up to people who are dead because we like what they represented and what they did. I don't mean it that way. What I mean is the popularization of talking about and doing things that could possibly lead to you dying, and then people celebrating you after you died, even though the way that you were living and the way that you were talking and the things that you said that made you popular were things that you were basically asking to be killed. And then you end up getting killed, and then people celebrate you as if you did something great. That's what we do in our culture. Again, there's no other culture in the America that, at least that I know of, that celebrates this. I don't see any Latins doing this. I don't see Asian people doing it. I don't see Jewish people doing it. I don't see any religion doing it. Only black culture do we celebrate people dying, even though all they did and talk about was things that were going to get them murdered. And then they got murdered, and then we're like, hey, success. How is this? From the way that we, again, I celebrate, make tributes to, and cry at the graves of dead rappers specifically, and specifically rappers who died from the very violence that they rap about in their music. It's one thing when a person passes away, as I said, unexpectedly. If your grandma dies, I don't mind you having relevance for your dead grandma. It's another thing if your grandma's a gangster rapper rapping about shooting everybody else and then she gets shot and then you act like it was some tragedy. All right, well, that's what you were talking about. Obviously, that's what you wanted. That's the part that I'm talking about. So when your favorite rapper dies from actually living out the stuff that they were rapping about in their music that they insisted was real, and then they proved that it's real by getting their heads shot off, and people act like this is some kind of bad thing. All right, their death should actually confirm to you that they were telling the truth. And it's also confirmed to you probably don't want to live that kind of truth. So the Notorious B.I.G., his first album, one of my favorite rappers, his first album was called Ready to Die. His second album was called Life After Death. And in between album 1 and album 2, guess what happened to Notorious B.I.G.? He got killed. He got murdered. He was rapping about getting murdered. He got murdered. Tupac rapped often about the fact that he expected to get murdered for the things that he was saying on his songs. 26 or 24, I can't remember which one, murdered. Based on doing shit that he rapped about. The people don't know how Tupac died. He was in Las Vegas the night of a Mike Tyson fight back in the 90s. He was rolling with a bunch of gang-banging guys from LA, from the West Coast. He ran into some guy who was also from LA, who I guess he identified as a rival gang member. Tupac and his friends beat this guy up, beat him to a pulp in the middle of the lobby of a Vegas hotel. This is all on security footage. Then Tupac gets in a car, and as he's driving down the Las Vegas Strip in the car, another car pulls up, ostensibly either the person or affiliates of the people Tupac had just beat up, and they murdered him. They shot him right there in the car. That's how Tupac died. So he died living exactly how he rapped. Right? So it shouldn't be a tragedy that he died. That's what he wanted. But we celebrate this. And again, I'm a fan of Tupac. I'm a fan of Notorious B.I.G. But at the same time, I know how to separate the music from it being instructions. I can listen to music as entertainment rather than looking at it as an instruction on how I'm supposed to live. Nipsey Hussle, if you want a more contemporary example, I believe it was 2019 Nipsey Hussle got murdered. So Tupac and Big were in the mid-90s. Nipsey Hussle was 2019. Not as popular as Tupac and Biggie, but starting to become more known. Nipsey Hussle got murdered in Los Angeles by someone who was allegedly an affiliate, a friend of his. He had just, if you see the security footage from when Nipsey Hussle got murdered, he shook hands with a guy. A guy walked up to him. They shake hands, have a conversation. The guy leaves. The guy comes back a couple minutes later and shoots Nipsey Hussle in the head. Again, now, why am I bringing up? I'm bringing up Nipsey Hussle because Nipsey Hussle had a series of mixtapes. This is when he was more a regional guy. He was starting to become more national when he got murdered. But when he was more regional, he had a series of mixtapes titled Bullets Ain't Got No Name. And then he got murdered by a bullet. And again, there's no other culture that celebrates this stuff. And when Nipsey Hussle died, you saw so much outpouring of support for him as if he was, again, like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X or no former president had passed away. This is the way that people in the culture celebrated this. And again, I'm a fan of Nipsey Hussle's music. Still listen to it to this very day. But there's no culture in America that celebrates people dying from the very shit that they lived talking about as if it's some type of success or accomplishment. We're the only culture that does this. All three of these rappers, again, died from gunshots. Let's talk about a rapper that didn't die from gunshots, 50 Cent. My favorite rapper to this day, 50 Cent. He built his entire career around the persona of being this bulletproof guy because he got shot 9 times, didn't die, came back and lived to tell the story, made a whole album about it, and all you know who 50 Cent is. We have created and celebrated a culture that talks about this stuff, dying by violence, as if it's a cool thing. That's what we do. And that's an issue in this culture. Because the thing with the culture, hip hop culture, rap music specifically, is that all these rappers who I mentioned have all emphasized over and over and over again in their music that everything they rap about is the truth and real, and they're not joking, they're not just saying it as entertainment. That they really mean it, and that they really did this stuff, and they really will shoot you, and they really will kill you, and the people around them really will too. And then most of them end up dead by gunshots. But we celebrate it. Again, a person who grows up, any person rather, who grows up living the way that gangster rappers rap are usually going to end up dead. And this is the issue with rappers insisting that the stuff they say is real. It'd be one thing if they were saying, hey, I'm just doing this for entertainment, but they say that it's real. So that means there are people out there who are impressionable enough that are going to listen to it and think that maybe I should live that way because this person is successful. 50 Cent, Nipsey Hussle, Tupac, Big, these people were looked at as pictures of success because of the attention that they had, because of the money that they allegedly made and the things that they showed off and talk about. Then these people are successful. So there are people out there thinking, well, maybe I should live like that too. Because look, they became successful. Maybe I can as well. You might end up dead. And the thing is, there ain't gonna be no celebration for your death because nobody knows who the hell you are. Again, no other culture does this. Again, and if you're not a platinum selling millionaire musician, alleged millionaire musician, then you ain't gonna get a big funeral at the local basketball stadium. Only they got that. You're just a dead body and nobody even knows what happened to you. Nobody knows who you are. Point number 2, we're talking here today about trashing hip hop culture, quote unquote, the culture. Number 2, drug selling / drug addiction. It's both of them now. It used to be just one, now it's both. Now back in the 1990s and going into the early 2000s, this is the time that I listened to hip hop probably the most. The popular drug references in rap music was usually about people talking about selling drugs. So these were drug entrepreneurs. They made their money by selling a bunch of drugs, illegal drug dealing. They made their money and then they were able to ease out of the drug dealing game and get into the rap music game. This is the story of many rappers from the 90s going into the 2000s. And even if they weren't doing it, they presented themselves in the similar vein of the people who were doing it. So there were a bunch of rappers who didn't deal drugs, but they presented themselves the same way that the drug dealers did. There were a bunch of drug dealers who didn't rap. They presented themselves in a way showing off their jewelry and material possessions. And then you had a bunch of rappers who were former drug dealers, or at least they claimed they were former drug dealers, who would show off all their stuff. So you had these 3 levels of people all pretty much presenting themselves the exact same way with the same energy. So this is where you get the Jay-Z's, Notorious B.I.G., Eazy-E, contemporary more Pusha T, Rick Ross, many, many others. I'm just naming a few. And they all came up telling you the same story, that they were all big drug dealers and they made a bunch of money dealing drugs. They would tell you how much money they made dealing drugs. And they used all that to build their alleged credibility in the streets with rap fans. Oh, he was in the streets, he was hustling, he was drug dealing, etc., etc. So similar to what I said in the first point, anyone who grows up listening to this and having it impressed upon you that this person is successful, maybe I should go out and do the same thing, you usually end up incarcerated or murdered because that's what happens to most drug dealers. Most drug dealers do not become millionaires. They do not become famous rappers. They do not get away scot-free. They either get murdered or they get arrested. That's usually what happens to drug dealers. So these few and far between who are able to make it out, or at least if we are to believe that they actually ever dealt drugs and they made it out, they are the exceptions, they are not the rule. But in our culture, again, we have them insist to us that they're telling the truth and they're successful. So again, putting two and two together, maybe I should go do it. And this is what's being impressed upon on our young men in our culture, in our communities rather, because they are paying attention to this culture. This is very popular stuff. And I'll say this now while we're talking about it, because a lot of people listen to what I'm saying. They say, well, Dre, the reason why the music is popular is not because of the black people rapping about it, is because of the people who own the companies. They are not black. And they're the ones who are pushing the music and putting the money behind it and the marketing behind it. They're the ones who are making it popular. To that, I answer bullshit. Miss me with this no accountability bullshit that black people have been pushing on each other for decades. It's always somebody else's fault. If I'm a rapper and I get signed to a record deal, there is no person who can make me get into the studio and start rapping about killing people and selling drugs if I don't want to. I don't care how much money they offer me. You offer me, they say, Dre, look, if you rap about personal development and mindset and working out and being in shape, we'll give you $100,000. But if you rap about killing people and dealing drugs, we'll give you $100 million. I don't have to take the $100 million if I don't want to. Now, if I decide to take the $100 million, I can't blame the person who offered me the $100 million. I got to blame myself because I decided to take the deal. So I don't think I need to go any further on that one. So just in case any of you was even thinking about coming to me with that bullshit, please put it back in your fucking pocket. No, we're not blaming it on somebody else. If somebody offers you money to do something crazy, if you're a heterosexual man listening to this, if someone offered you $100,000 to have homosexual sex with a man, would you do it? Okay, so if the answer is no, then don't blame the person offering you the money. Blame the person who accepts the deal. Okay, now that we got that out the way, let me continue with what I was saying. So in the current era, the drug affiliation has flipped now. So now we don't have, not only do we have people, we don't as much have people talking about dealing drugs. We do, but not as much. Now we got the drug users. We got the drug abusers. These are people who rap about how much drugs they actually consume, whether that's alcohol, prescription pills that they're not supposed to have, or some hardcore stuff. So you get rappers like Future, you get rappers like Lil Wayne, and many others. I don't listen to as much rap music as I used to. So there's a bunch of the newer guys who rap about being a drug user. Now they make music about telling you how they're abusing the prescription drugs that, again, they're not even supposed to be legally in possession of. And this gets the unsuspecting music fan who doesn't understand that this is just some bullshit that they're saying, or it's some bullshit that they really mean. You could be enticing people to become drug addicts because, again, in hip hop culture, our entertainers insist that everything that they're telling you is the truth and is real. And again, put that together with the fact that these people appear to be successful. Well, why not emulate what they're doing? Again, this is an equally unfortunate outcome, whether you become a drug dealer and get arrested or murdered, or a drug addict and you end up addicted to drugs. Either way, you end up in a bad position. Or you get arrested for having drugs you ain't supposed to have. Either way, this doesn't work out for us. Moving on, point number 3. We're talking today about trashing hip hop, quote unquote, culture. Not trashing hip hop itself, but what people label as the culture. That's what I'm trashing. Point number 3, incarceration. It's another thing we make cool. Along with being a gangster, along with violence, shooting, killing people, along with dealing and using drugs, what comes with all of those things is if you don't get murdered, you usually end up behind bars. You end up incarcerated. And incarceration has become almost like a rite of passage in hip hop culture, specifically coming from the rappers who are often the most popular people in hip hop culture, or the music makers. And this is another piece that rappers have used for decades as a credibility builder to get their names and their alleged background stories to be verified because, oh, well, look, this person got arrested. This person has police after them. This person had called a federal case and they had to go to court for it. All right, rappers telling you how they either went to jail, they did crime that should have sent them to jail and they were able to avoid it in some way, or how all the people that they hang with have either gone to jail or they do stuff that could get them sent to jail. This is what every rapper does. You even get rappers like Drake, who is a half black and half Jewish guy who got raised by his white Jewish mother in Canada, who is not a gangster at all, used to be an actor on TV. Even he raps about how the people around him are all the gangsters. They're the ones going to jail. They're the ones who do illegal stuff that can get them sent to jail. So he uses them as a proxy for his own credibility. All right, he has street credibility because the guys he hangs with are gangsters. All right, they'll do gangster stuff. And this is the whole point being that your entree into being accepted in hip hop culture is you have to show that you or someone around you could do something gangster or has had something gangster happen to you that can get you murdered, get you incarcerated, etc. Another person who's very popular these days, being that I'm recording this and you're going to be hearing this in 2025, Kendrick Lamar. Now, he's a guy who, listening to his music, I'm not a deep listener of Kendrick, but I've listened to a good amount of Kendrick. He doesn't seem to be the guy who was doing a whole bunch of gangster stuff himself, but he raps about how gangster things happen around him. On his first album, he tells his whole story about, in between the songs, I like the way his first album was put together. I'm a fan of his first album, that he meets some girl, because he's from LA, from LA and near Compton, and he meets some girl who happens to live on the edge of a gang area, and he wants to date this girl, but he ends up getting set up and beat up by some gang members in that area when he goes to see the girl. Then he goes and tells his friends that the guys beat him up. He and his friends say, okay, well, we're going to get our guns. We're going to go shoot those guys. They go to shoot those guys. Those guys shoot back. One of Kendrick's friends get murdered. All right, this story is told throughout his first album. And the whole point being, he also fell into the trap of having to slip in. Let me tell you how one of these things, drug use, violence, incarceration. Let me tell you how one of these things is part of my story as well. And again, this is credibility in hip hop. No other culture does this. No other culture takes these negative things and turns them into, oh, well, you got to have this piece in order to be credible in our space. This is extremely problematic because most people who end up in the judicial system in the United States cannot afford to prove their innocence. And yes, your innocence is afforded. It is not about justice being blind. Justice in America is not blind. Justice in America has its hand out. And if you have money, you get justice. If you don't have money, you get jail. That's how it works. So if you're listening to someone rap about stuff that can get you incarcerated or even get you in the system, period, just get you in court, and you don't have any money, Now you're probably going to jail. If you end up in the legal system and don't have money, you're probably going to jail. That's the way it works. And these people, when they end up in jail and can't pay to prove their innocence, it's hard to get your life back on track after you have something on your record, especially any type of felony conviction. Because you can't get a job, you can't rent an apartment, and a lot of people don't want to deal with you. I mean, if you can't get a job and you can't find a place to live, well, what else is there? Really, what else is there? And you can't extract yourself from the system. The system owns you. This is why gangster rappers rapping about anything that can get a person incarcerated or bragging about themselves being incarcerated, you are setting up the average impressionable person, young people, impressionable person for a lifetime of failure, because most of them are not going to be famous like you. And most of them are actually believing the shit that you're saying. Even if you're lying, they're going to go actually do it when you were just talking shit. You didn't even really do it, but they did. Now they got to go live it based on your word. Now that does not make the rapper responsible. Let me be very clear. It doesn't make the rapper responsible for what some 15-year-old kid does. However, if we're going to say that this is our culture and this is one of the things that our culture extols and puts out there, that's why I'm taking the culture to task. I'm not saying that the rapper is responsible for it. Same way that I wouldn't say that some white music executive is responsible for a rapper talking about shooting everybody. Just because the executive gave you the money doesn't mean you got to say it. Again, you chose to say it because they gave you more money. Okay, so you'll just do anything for money. And there are many people out there who would. They wouldn't say that, but they would. So going to jail, folks, we celebrate this as if it's part of our culture, but going to jail is not a good idea, even if you can afford a lawyer, even if you can afford to prove yourself innocent. Because going to jail costs you money, it costs you time, and you're setting a poor example for people who cannot afford to do the same thing that you did, which is most people with regards to serious crimes. They can't afford to prove that they're innocent. So when you're rapping about it, you're setting people up, again, for the wrong thing. And we're celebrating this as if this is how you got to think in order to be cool. And it doesn't make any sense. But this is what our culture, quote unquote culture, has become. And tomorrow we can get into part 2 of this. So let me recap part 1. So this is trashing hip hop, quote unquote culture. All of you have heard of this phrase: urban culture, street culture, black culture. All of these, the same thing. Point number 1, Black Death. We celebrate the death of people who rap about and live as if they are looking forward to being murdered. They get murdered, and then we act as if it's some type of tragedy. Well, it's not a tragedy. It's a success for them because that's exactly what they seem to be wanting because they kept talking about it. Number 2, drug selling and drug addiction. So it used to be all the rappers were drug dealers. Now, these days, all the rappers are drug users. Either way, abuse of illicit drugs is not a good thing. I think all of us understand that. But in our culture, it seems to be celebrated, whether you're using them or you're selling them. Number 3, incarceration. Going to jail is a rite of passage. It's almost like a credibility piece if you're going to be in hip hop. You have to have going to jail. You have to have been incarcerated, or you have to be doing things that could get you in jail. You're just slick enough to have not gotten caught. And we celebrate this. Again, this is all bullshit. And these are all things that are being pushed in our culture as if it is cool. We can still have a culture without this nonsense, but we tend to buy into the nonsense. And I know many of you are thinking of ways of defending this. You shouldn't be defending it. You should be saying, you know what, that's absolutely right. You can appreciate the entertainment aspect of it, which I do. Again, I listen to hip hop music, probably more than many of you who are even listening to this. But at the same time, I know how to separate the bullshit in the music from the entertainment side of it. And I know it doesn't mean it's a prescription for me to go out and live, which a lot of people don't have the sense to understand that. And a lot of people on the outside look at our stuff that we call our culture and say, what are these idiots listening to and talking about? And why are they celebrating these people? And again, this is one of the problems that we have. This is the reason why when you see a politician, Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, they go get some hip hop artists to come speak at a rally. And some of us are like, why the hell do they have a rapper speaking at why do they have Cardi B or Megan Thee Stallion or Quavo from the Migos speaking at a political convention? Like, these people are going to, at a rally, trying to tell us the way that we're supposed to vote. Why the fuck does anybody want to hear what these people have to say? Because we look up to them. Our culture has deemed that these are the people that should be listened to. All right, these people who run these campaigns are not dumb. They know exactly who has all the influence, and this is what our culture has become. So anyone who may want to say, well, Dre, you want to debunk my point by saying, well, that's not the culture. Well, again, I didn't see Kamala Harris bringing in some college professor to speak to the people. They brought in the popular people. Who's the popular people? The people rapping about this bullshit. And some of the things that those rappers that I just mentioned, some of the things that they do, we're going to get into in part number 2 tomorrow. So workonyourgameuniversity.com. If you want to get out here and operate with some fucking sense, where you can consume the culture but not become not walk around as if you are trying to live like the culture, and you want to be able to point out the bullshit in people's nonsense and get to the truth regardless of what everybody else feels about it, I can show you how to do it. Do you think? Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com, have me as your direct coach, and we'll get to it. Tomorrow, part 2 of the series. Work on your game. Dre, all